Hi everyone, and welcome to our Product Safety and Recall Index webinar for the Australian market. Now, hopefully you joined us for what I suppose was 6 or 7 months ago now for our very first Australian Focus Index, which was a look at 2024 recall stats as a collective year. This session covers the first edition of 2025, where we focus on the first half of the year, which will be released tomorrow. So myself and Chris are looking forward to taking you through some of the top level metrics, trends, and industry updates that we've captured. Now, before we get into the detail, we'll just do some introductions so you know who we are. So I'm Mark Buckingham, a consultant within Sedgwick's brand protection division, and I've been consulting and advising clients for over 10 years on recall best practices and developing solutions to remediate defective products from the market. And I'm also joined by my colleague Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Pleased to be on today's and Sedgwick's second Australian Index webinar. So similarly to Mark, I'm also an international product recall consultant within our brand protection division. So helping our clients at the very early stages of scoping out their recall and putting together a plan to communicate with their customers and then help them to also get products off the market.
Absolutely. Now, we've managed approximately 7,000 recall events as a service provider, and we also hold industry roundtable events in different parts of the world for people to attend and to learn more about best practices, how to prepare for recalls better, what drives response rates, etc. We actually held 3 very successful seminars this year in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, which we did in partnership with Ashurst, and we also had the ACCC regulator speaking as well. So, definitely let us know if you'd be interested in joining any of our future events. Let's get started on terms of what we can actually find in the latest index there. And so this session is designed just to give you the highlights from the first half of 2025. The full report has more details than we can actually fit into the presentation. So it is out tomorrow and goes into great detail and the granular detail that you want to find, but across the different industries. So this is really just a snapshot. We do want to mention that this particular session has been pre-recorded. Now, typically we do them live as we like to do Q&As, but just due to scheduling, we've prepared this one in advance. So for those of you who have participated on any of our other webinars, we won't have the poll question at the start of each industry section. Now, we do get some questions in advance when people sign up and register, and also at the end of some of our previous webinars that we think are really valuable that we want to bring forwards. So we'll answer those questions at the end of each of the different sections. So Chris, you want to start talking about the different industries that we're going to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So in today's webinar, we will look at 5 industries, which are consumer products, automotive, food and drink, medical device, and pharmaceutical. So we review data from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or the ACCC, the Food Standards Australia New Zealand, or FSANZ, and the Therapeutic Goods Administration, known as the TGA, as well as Australia's Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communication, Sports, and the Arts.
Thanks, Chris. Now, our index wouldn't be half as valuable without the contributions we receive from our various partners, who are experts in the product liability and regulatory space and give insights into what regulations might actually mean for manufacturers, or practical advice on how best to navigate the emerging trends that we see and we distill in the data. So just to call out a thank you to the great support from both Ashurst and Wootton Kearney on the screen. You can find their full contributions within the index report, which will be published and sent out tomorrow. Now, in this edition, we'll review recall data and regulatory actions from the first half of the year. So this is from January through to June, and we're comparing it to July through December of 2024 last year. So in simple terms, comparing the first half of this year to the second half of last year. And what we've seen in the data is that the overall number of market actions fell by 13.6%. There were 686 events in the second half of last year compared to 593 in the first half of this year. This total reflects not only product recalls, but also product corrections and product alerts in the medical device and pharmaceutical sectors. Looking strictly at product recalls, there were 394 events up to June this year, which is down from 460 recalls in the 6 months previous. 4 of the 5 industries that we track had fewer events in the first half of 2025 compared to the second half of last year. The biggest drops are in the automotive industry, which saw recalls decrease almost 31%, and they dropped from 163 events to 113. Recalls in the Australian food and drink industry fell from 40 to 33. The pharmaceutical sector had an 18.4% decline in market actions in the same time period, and the medical device industry had 296 market actions in the first half of 2025 compared to 326 in the second half of 2024. The consumer product sector was the only one to see an increase in the volume of recalls. However, this saw a marginal 3% gain as it went up to 111 from 108. Based upon historic insight, it's normal for recall volumes and market action numbers in the first 6 months of a year to be lower than those in the second half. So despite the decrease, 2025 had the highest first half recall total in 3 years. So Chris, what else was going on across the different market sectors?
So in the first half of the year, several sectors saw regulatory changes that will bring Australia more in line with other major economies. So these include enhanced cybersecurity rules for smart devices and toys, extended producer responsibilities for batteries and other consumer goods, requirements for autonomous emergency braking in vehicles, and more regulations for lithium-ion batteries in e-micromobility devices. The TGA's new procedure for recalls, product alerts, and product corrections took effect in March. It replaced the uniform recall procedure for therapeutic goods as the regulation that medical devices, medicines, bloods, and biologicals must follow when conducting product recalls and other market actions. There were also big changes in the food sector, with the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct now mandatory for all supermarkets and grocery wholesalers, with the code designed to protect suppliers and farmers. FSANZ also approved its first cell-cultivated food and updated definitions related to genetically modified foods, creating more opportunities for novel foods.
Thanks, Chris, for those highlights. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive into each of these specific industries and go into some of the metrics for them. So we're going to start with the automotive industry. So in the first half of 2025, a new Australian design rule took effect requiring all new vehicles sold in Australia to have car-to-car autonomous emergency braking systems. As a result of these changes, some well-known models from leading manufacturers may no longer be available in the Australian market. Cars are not the only forms of transport subject to new laws. So in New South Wales, regulations are now in place to designate e-micro-mobility devices, which includes e-bikes, e-scooters, and the lithium-ion batteries used to power them, as declared electrical articles. This means they must comply with relevant state mandatory product safety standards. New South Wales lawmakers are also considering overhauling rules regarding where the devices can be operated.
Great. So let's have a look at some of the data then. In the first half of the year, the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communication, Sport and the Arts issued 113 recalls, a 31% decrease from the 163 recalls in the second half of last year. The number of impacted units fell even more, so there were 888,000 units recalled in the second half of last year, compared to 185,000 in the first half of this year, so a 79% decrease. The majority of the recalls were for passenger cars, with 48 events, considerably fewer than the 79 in the previous 6 months. Motorcycles had the second highest total with 18 recalls, followed by commercial and heavy goods vehicles with 11. The combination of passenger cars and pickup trucks had the highest volume of units recalled, with 69,000, with motorcycles having just over 20,000 units recalled. Electrical systems were the leading cause of automotive recalls, with 17 events, down from 34, and service brakes and powertrains were each responsible for 11 recalls, placing them second in terms of hazards, with equipment and exterior lighting in third, with 10 events each. Engines and engine cooling systems were the leading concern by volume, with 38,000 units impacted. So this is compared to 162,000 units previously. Electrical systems were second, with 37,000 units affected, followed by visibility and wipers with 30,000 units. Okay, so before we move on to the next section, as we said, we do encourage questions in the build-up that we can answer during some of these webinars, and this is one that was submitted to us earlier on this week. So the question was, how will the requirement for all new vehicles to have autonomous emergency braking systems affect automakers and distributors? So thank you for the question. In answer, companies across the automotive industry should have been preparing for this change. So this technology has been mandatory for models newly introduced to the Australian market since August of 2024, whereas now it applies to every new vehicle. While the regulation may mean that some older models will not be available in Australia, it will improve safety for drivers, and it also makes Australian vehicle requirements on par with other jurisdictions, which may be easier for automotive manufacturers who distribute vehicles in multiple markets.
Excellent. And for more detail on the automotive sector, you can find all the breakdowns that we've talked about here and some more information within the index report itself. Now we're going to move across to the consumer products industry and see what highlights we've got there. So the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or the ACCC, announced in February that it had conducted a sweep of more than 2,000 Australian retail websites. The agency found that some businesses were using terms and conditions that may violate the Australian consumer law. The main concerns were around businesses' return policies and website terms that might be misleading for consumers. The ACCC took an active approach to enforcement in other areas as well in the first half of this year. So in April, the Federal Court of Australia ordered a major consumer products company to pay an $8.5 million fine in a suit brought by the agency for greenwashing. In addition, the ACCC brought proceedings against a consumer goods company for selling 70 product lines containing button batteries that did not comply with Australia's mandatory button battery standards. These goods included novelty products such as toys, digital notepads, keyrings, lights, and light-up accessories, for example. A fast food restaurant agreed to pay more than $150,000 in fines to settle 8 infringement notices issued by the ACCC over its kids' meals. The meals contained toys that did not comply with the mandatory button cell battery regulations either. The New South Wales Government Products Lifecycle Responsibility Act 2025 became law in April. Because the rule looks at obligations from design through end-of-life management, there is accountability not only for the manufacturers, but also for the designers and the suppliers as well.
Great. So now looking at some of the consumer product recall data, there were 111 consumer product recalls issued by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission in the first half of the year. So that was up marginally from 108 events in the second half of last year, which had 94. The consumer product category with the most recalls was electronics, with 32 events, up from 26. Sports and recreation had the second most recalls by product category, with 16 events. And then toys, as well as yard and garden, were third with 14 recalls each. Choking and internal burns were the most common risk category, with 31 recalls. And the combination of burns and fire was second, linked to 15 events, followed by injury with 11. So we'll just kind of pause there again to answer another submitted question again earlier on this week. So the question was, Australia's cyber security rules 2025 were registered in March of 2025. So what steps should manufacturers take to comply with the new security standards for relevant connectable products such as smart TVs, smartwatches, fitness trackers, and network toys? So another really good question. So companies have a year to prepare for the new requirements. So manufacturers and suppliers should first assess whether their products are in the scope of the new regulation. For companies outside of Australia, they should also consider if the product will be acquired in Australia, as this may be particularly important for products sold via online platforms. Also, companies should compare the mandatory security standards set out in the regulation against their current product design, firmware policies, and support lifecycle to determine any changes that need to be made.
Perfect, thank you. So we're going to move into the food and drink sector, but as highlighted before, if you need anything on the consumer and auto side, that all of the detail that we've discussed here and more will be in the full index report. Now, food and beverage. So in January, FSANS launched its new Food Standards Code compilation. The document brings together all 80 standards, excuse me, and 29 schedules of the code. So this includes topics applicable to all foods, such as labeling, substances added to or present in food, contaminants and residues, and which foods require pre-market clearance. There are also requirements for specific food categories, including fruit and vegetables, alcoholic beverages, and meat, eggs, and fish. More changes were made to the code in June after FSANS approved the first cell cultured food and updated the definitions for genetically modified foods. So these revisions bring Australia and New Zealand more closely aligned with other major economies. The new Food and Grocery Code of Conduct from the ACCC came into effect in April 2025. The revised rules provide more protection for suppliers and farmers in their agreements with supermarkets and grocery wholesalers. The regulation also introduces steep fines for non-compliance and works to ensure more balanced bargaining power and enhanced dispute resolution. So when we look at some of the data, FSANS issued 33 food and drink recalls up to June 2025. This is down from 40 recalls in the 6 months previous. It's also lower than the first half of 2024, which had 39 food and drink recalls. The top food safety concern was undeclared allergens. So in the first half of this year, this risk was responsible for 16 incidents, or 48.5% of all Australian food recalls. This is compared to 29 events for the second half of 2024. The leading allergen was nuts, which were linked to 8 recalls. Bacterial contamination was the second most common cause of Australian food and drink recalls in the first half of this year. So there were 8 events, and it was followed by foreign materials with 5 recalls. The product category most impacted by recalls in the first half of this year was prepared foods. So it had 8 events, down from 18 in the second half of last year. Produce, baked goods, and candies tied for the second highest number of recall events with 4 each, and soups, broths, sauces, and condiments were third with 3 events. And there were 30 different companies involved in the food and drink recalls in the first half of this year, and all but one of these recorded a single event. Now, in the food and beverage space, the topic of conversation has been around the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct being mandatory, and how can supermarkets and wholesalers reduce their risk of receiving fines. So we put it to our team, who state that large retail outlets should put their grocery supply agreements in writing. Since the code applies to existing and as well as future agreements, they should also ensure that every active contract aligns with the provisions of the F&G code. In addition, retailers and wholesalers should maintain clear and transparent communication channels with suppliers, especially regarding any changes in requirements, pricing, or promotions. Now, we always get a ton of questions in the food and beverage sector in some of the other webinars that we do, and we love answering questions that you may have. So please feel free, as I say, to contribute any to us that we can answer and circle back. I think, Chris, we're going to take a look into the medical device space.
Yes, we will. So in a major change across the therapeutic goods sector, the TGA's new procedure for recalls, product alerts, and product corrections went into force in March of this year. So the new regulation is designed to streamline and clarify definitions and responsibilities for sponsors of medical device, biologicals, bloods, and medicines during product recalls and other market actions. The TGA also announced updates to regulations for reporting adverse events for medical devices. Hospitals will soon be required to report these incidents, which may result in an uptick in these types of events. And just as a note, we have updated the terminology in our data reporting to reflect the new labels the TGA is using under the procedure for recalls, product alerts, and product corrections. So the TGA issued 296 market actions across the medical device sector in the first half of the year, and these included 108 product recalls, 153 product corrections, and 27 product alerts. So this is a 9.2% decrease from the 326 market actions over the previous 6 months, and is also slightly lower than the 300 actions at the start of last year. Software concerns resulted in 56 market actions, more than any other hazard category, and 14% increase compared to the 49 software events. Device failure was second with 42, and false results were third with 27 events. The majority of medical device market actions occurred at the hospital level in terms of distribution into the market. So there were 260 events in this category, down from 298. There were 19 market actions at the retail level, 15 at the consumer level, and 2 events at the wholesale level. There were 23 medical device market actions categorized as Class 1, decreasing from 37. 226 events were deemed Class 2 compared to 241 previously, and there were 47 Class 3 actions. Okay, and then just answering a quick question that we received on the medical device sector, which was, in light of the new obligations under the procedure for recalls, product alerts, and product corrections, what steps should medical device sponsors take to prepare for a market action? So a really good question in regards to what we've just been speaking about there. And in answer, the TGA suggests that sponsors keep up-to-date and accurate customer records which outline the market action procedure in their quality management system. So this includes identifying who is responsible within the organization, procedures for arranging the return of the goods, the customer reimbursement policy, and where and how key information such as contact details for the TGA is stored.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. Now we're just going to pivot into the pharmaceutical sector, which is also one of our last sections. So the new procedure for recalls, product alerts, and product corrections that Chris mentioned there, and we also mentioned in the medical device section, also impacts pharmaceuticals. So changes to product recalls and market actions were not the only revisions in March. The TGA published feedback on its consultation that explored proposed changes to communications and protocols for product shortages. So 25 substances added to the list of reportable medicines, and more updates are likely to be on the way. As the cosmetic injectable market in Australia continues to grow, state and federal regulators have issued guidance to clarify rules around a range of actions related to these substances. So just going into some of the data, so in the first half of 2025, the TGA had 40 market actions across the pharmaceutical sector, and these include 29 product recalls, 4 product corrections, 6 product alerts, and 1 recall/product alert. And this is down compared to the 49 market actions in the second half of 2024. And of those actions, of those 49 last year, 34 of those were flagged as product recalls. And that number is also fewer than the first half of 2024, which had 47 market actions in total, including 33 product recalls. Mislabeling had 10 market actions, the most of any concern. So contamination was second with 7 events, and failed specifications and sterility issues tied for third with 4 actions each. There were 17 market actions at the retail level in terms of distribution into the market. This breaks the trend we have seen over the past several years, where the majority of events were at the hospital level. In the first half of 2025, 13 events were at the hospital level. 9 events took place at the consumer level compared to 4 in the second half of last year. And there was 1 market action at the wholesale level. In the first half of 2025, there's been 11 market actions categorized as Class 1, which is up from 6 in the second half of last year. There were 13 actions deemed Class 2, which is down from 30 in the second half of last year. And there were 16 Class 3 actions in the first half of this year, compared to the 13 we saw last year. The 40 market actions this year involved 33 different companies. And while the majority of companies were only cited in 1 event, 4 companies were linked to 2 events, and 1 company was linked to 4 separate events, spanning a range of concerns, including packaging defects, shipping issues, and mislabeling. Now, just looking at one of the questions that we selected for the pharma space was that since the new procedure for recalls, product alerts, and product corrections applies to medicines as well as medical devices, bloods, and biologicals, are there steps pharmaceutical sponsors should be considering? Now, in addition to the steps we mentioned in the medical device section, the TGA encourages companies to clearly document the responsibilities of the manufacturer in writing, and these obligations may include investigating adverse events and maintaining procedures and criteria for recalling goods. In addition, the TGA advises sponsors to consider conducting mock recalls to practice ahead of a real market action, And we've certainly seen with our clients the value of proactive preparation, including things such as mock recalls.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So just in closing, we realised that we've covered a lot of information there over the last kind of half an hour or so. And there's even more information in the full Australia Product Safety and Recall Index report. The report also has expanded insights from our partners, as Mark mentioned, and information on the data and trends that we discussed. So as a follow-up to today's webinar, we will email you the full digital version of the report either later today or tomorrow, depending on which time zone you're in. Also, a quick reminder, we publish similar index reports each quarter for the US and European markets. So to obtain your copy of these, please scan the QR codes that are on your screen now. We will also post the links in the chat as well if you're on PC. If you do have any questions for either Mark or I, please do reach out through our contact details. We'd also be very happy to schedule some time to have a quick conversation. And please do also send us any questions or comments on today's session on the format. We really appreciate any feedback that you have, any detail that you feel like we've gone into too much detail on, or anything that you'd like more information on for our future webinars. We'd really appreciate any kind of feedback. So yeah, thank you very much for joining our first Australian market webinar of 2025, and we hope to see you on the next one.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.